Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is a pleasure and an honor to stand before you today, representing my nation in advocacy of a principle that we hold dear. I congratulate you, Mr. President, on being elected to preside over the 67th session of the General Assembly. Let me also congratulate and thank the outgoing President, His Excellency Mr. Nasir Abdul Aziz Al Nasir, and his co-facilitators from Mexico and Denmark, who assisted him in the formulation of the draft declaration on the rule of law. The principles enshrined in this document resonate strongly with the Maldives, and we lend our weight to the fruition of the values so espoused. Allow me also, Mr. President, to commend the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for his untiring efforts in promoting the rule of law around the world. Mr. President, rule of law is the foundation of governance. Societies from their inception have had their own set of rules, norms, and boundaries to govern their lives for themselves and their relationship with others. Applied by the governors unto the governed, this universal tenet applies to all of us in the family of humanity. The fundamental application of law creates societies and paves the way for civilization, making it the litmus test between barbarism and civilization. This is true from the first inscription of law in the Code of Hammurabi, promulgated by the king of Babylon around 1760 BC, to Immanuel Kant's philosophy of law articulated in the 18th century, to the Declaration of the World Summit in 2005, which called for universal adherence to and implementation of the rule of law at both the national and international levels. Mr. President, the saying that the basis for democracy is the rule of law stands ground only when we build our societies on democratic principles, only when the fundamentals of human rights and minority rights are protected, and only when the smallest and the weakest of our citizens feel safe. Despite the almost universal support the rule of law has gained, it is perhaps worth asking the question whether this principle has been applied in its true sense. When leaders consider that the law should not be applied to them as much as it is applied to the ruled, then it is not the rule of law. When national leaders responsible for upholding the law act with impunity, the rule of law fails. The rule of law can only exist when it is measured equally for the most powerful as well as the weakest. My tiny nation was one of the first countries in South Asia to adopt a constitution in 1932. In our stride towards development, we have had 6 constitutions and 7 more amendments. Yet the legal system in the Maldives is very weak and is in need of urgent reforms. In our quest for democracy, we enacted a new constitution 4 years ago. The 2008 constitution guarantees the separation of powers, a universal bill of rights, and a free media. The judiciary was granted independence and accountability measures set in. It is a constitution that would lead us in our path to democracy and best practices. The dramatic change in the legal, governance, constitutional, and administrative systems has subjected the Maldives to many challenges. The objectives set in the Constitution requires strict adherence to and uncompromising application of the rule of law. Mr. President, in the face of all of these challenges, my government remains committed to implementing the Constitution, upholding the rule of law, and making it a way of life. The Maldives is a state party to 7 of the 9 most important international human rights instruments. The Maldives will formulate a national strategy to strengthen national capacities to more effectively comply with these instruments. In addition, my government is seeking the consent of the Parliament to ratify or accede to other critically important international instruments, such as the ILO's 8 core conventions on fundamental human rights, the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocols, and International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from enforced disappearance. Strengthening police accountability constitutes a core component of my government's commitment to the rule of law. The government is taking the necessary measures to strengthen the internal review and oversight mechanisms in the Maldives Police Service. We are also taking actions to improve external review and monitoring of law enforcement operations by strengthening police integrity commissions. Mr. President, national governments and international organizations alike have a solemn duty to promote the rule of law. There is no debate on the importance and on the need for a code of principles and rules in the international arena. International organizations define for us the meaning of rule of law. They set the benchmarks against which the application of rule of law is measured, and they prescribe what changes are needed to improve a country's performance on the rule of law. But let me pause to reflect whether international organizations subject themselves to the same standards they set for member states. Recent experience of Maldives suggests that the answer is no to the question whether the weakest of our global family of nations feel safe and secure. Mr. President, small justice is being served for a small state. It is regrettable but true that some powerful national actors have come out in public and instructed the Maldives to take certain measures contradictory to our laws. We were asked to bring to an end presidential term and hold elections even if they were not allowed under the Constitution. We were asked in no uncertain terms to abide by such instructions even if it meant to amending the Constitution. We are being asked to withdraw certain criminal cases filed by independent state bodies for crimes as serious as the armed forced abduction and keeping in isolation a serving judge. We were told to take these measures for the good of the country. When we questioned these instructions, Maldives was labeled as an uncooperative state, casting doubt on the country's democratic credentials. We were placed on an international watch list without due process. These are clearly punitive measures against a country whose economy is dependent on its image. The labeling has resulted in Maldives losing significant investments, external loan financing, and foreign tourist arrivals into the country. This has also encouraged domestic unrest. It has choked the country's governance system and crippled our infant democracy. The world's small states cannot afford to be complacent. Our experience in dealing with the powerful international actors in the past few months has not been pleasant. If we do not stand up and draw your attention to the injustices, the next could be one of you. The Maldives is the smallest economy in South Asia. Small reductions in tourist arrivals or foreign investments have significant impact on our economy. Yet, as one of the smallest countries in the world, there is very little we could do politically to counter the pounding that we are subjected to by some international partners. We lack the political and economic might of the larger states to counter the weight of these international players. There is no recourse available for small states like the Maldives. We were not given a fair hearing or the benefit of doubt. Mr. President, we do recognize that international organizations play a valuable and indispensable role in promoting the rule of law. Small states like the Maldives value our membership of international organizations. We depend on them to advance our interests and values. We expect them to work with us in promoting the rule of law. We believe that the story of Maldives needs to be told. It is a lesson to be learned by other small states. The application of rule of law is to protect the smaller and the weaker, to prevent small justice being served to small states. Thank you.
The Maldives